Some men carry their proof in silence. A private gym in Los Angeles, Chinatown, 1967. The door swings open and a Japanese fighter walks in. Undefeated in 52 professional bouts. 30 of those fights ended with a single punch. He has crossed the Pacific for one reason: to expose a man he calls a fraud, a showman, a fake who would crumble against a real karate master. The man he seeks stands in the middle of the room, quiet, still. His name is Bruce Lee. Someone in the back secretly presses record on an 8mm camera. What it captures over the next 18 seconds will be buried for decades. The champion throws his legendary killing strike. The same punch that ended 30 fights. It hits nothing but air. But what did Bruce Lee do in those seconds that changed everything? If you enjoy this, please subscribe and turn on notifications. But before we get to those 18 seconds, you need to understand something. You need to understand why that gym existed, why that challenge was made, and why a man with 52 wins and nothing to prove flew 6,000 miles to fight someone half his size. Now here's the thing. In 1967, Bruce Lee was not yet Bruce Lee. Not the way the world would come to know him. He had no major films, no global fame. He was a 26-year-old martial artist living in Los Angeles, teaching a small but growing number of students out of a modest space in Chinatown. He had appeared on television, a show called The Green Hornet. He played Kato the sidekick. It got him noticed. But in the martial arts world, television was not respect. Television was suspicion. The traditional martial arts community watched Bruce Lee the way old money watches new money. With distrust, with quiet hostility, because Lee was not just teaching martial arts. He was dismantling the very idea of what martial arts was supposed to be. Believe me, that made people angry. Lee rejected forms. He rejected rigid stances. He rejected the idea that any single style held all the answers. He trained with boxers. He studied fencing footwork. He borrowed from wrestling. He took what worked and threw away what did not. And he said so, publicly, loudly. He called traditional techniques organized despair. He said most martial artists were practicing dry land swimming. He said they were rehearsing movements that would fail the moment a real fight began. Now, imagine you have spent your entire life inside a system. You have earned your rank. You have built your reputation. You have dedicated decades to a discipline that tells you there is one correct way. And then a young man from Hong Kong appears on American television and says everything you believe is wrong. That is not just an insult. That is a threat. And the karate world responded the way threatened institutions always respond. They attacked his credibility. A prominent martial arts magazine ran a piece in the spring of 1967. The article did not use subtle language. It called Lee a Hollywood showman. It questioned whether he had ever faced a real fighter. It suggested that his techniques were theatrical, designed to impress cameras, not survive combat. The article named him directly. It was not an opinion buried in the back pages. It was a statement of position from the establishment. That article crossed the Pacific. It reached Tokyo within weeks. And it landed on the desk of a man who had spent his entire career proving that karate was the supreme fighting art. A man who had never lost. A man whose right hand had ended 30 professional fights with a single strike. The champion read the article, and he saw an opportunity. Now get this. The champion did not need to fight Bruce Lee. He had nothing to gain from it. He was already at the top. 52 wins. 0 losses. Recognized across Asia as one of the most dangerous fighters alive. But this was not about adding another win to his record. This was about something bigger. This was about defending the honor of an entire system. If he could break Lee in front of witnesses, the conversation would be over. Every claim Lee had ever made would collapse. Every student Lee had ever taught would doubt what they had learned. The champion arrived in Los Angeles in the late summer of 1967. He brought 4 men with him. 2 were fighters from his camp. Two were officials from the Japanese Karate Federation. Their presence made the purpose clear. This was not a casual visit. This was a formal challenge. Word moved through Chinatown fast. The martial arts community there was tight. Everyone knew everyone. Within 2 days, Lee's senior students brought him the news. A man was in town, a dangerous man, and he was asking for Bruce Lee by name. They warned him. This was not some street fighter looking for attention. This was a professional, a man who had hospitalized opponents, a man whose signature technique was built to end fights in a single moment. Lee listened. He did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask for details about the man's record or his style. He asked one question. When does he want to do this? A meeting was arranged. The private gym in Chinatown. No press. No outsiders. No audience beyond the men each side chose to bring. The terms were simple. No terms. No rules. No referee. Just 2 men and whatever happened between them. Lee agreed without hesitation. And on the morning of the fight, while the champion arrived in a car with 4 men and a reputation that preceded him like a warning, Bruce Lee walked to the gym alone. No entourage. No students beside him. Just a man in a plain shirt walking through Chinatown at 8 in the morning, heading toward the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. He did not look nervous. He did not look excited. He looked like a man going to work. The gym was small, maybe 30 feet across. Concrete floor, a heavy bag in one corner, a wooden rack of training equipment along the wall. No mirrors, no padding. This was not a place built for show. It was a place built for work. And on that morning, it was a place built for a fight that was never supposed to be recorded. Lee arrived first. 3 of his senior students were already inside. They stood along the far wall, quiet, watching the door. The champion entered at 8:30. He walked in with 4 men, 2 fighters from his camp, 2 officials from the Federation. They wore suits. They carried nothing. But the way they positioned themselves told you everything. They stood near the door, not beside the champion, behind him, like men who expected to be needed. The champion's handler spoke first. His English was precise, practiced. He said this meeting was about truth, about testing the claims of a man who had made bold statements about the limitations of traditional martial arts. He said the champion was here to offer that test. Formally, respectfully. Now here's the thing. There was nothing respectful about it. The language was polite. The intent was not. Everyone in that room knew what this was. This was an execution. At least that is what the champion's side believed. Lee stood in the center of the room. He said nothing during the speech. He did not respond to the handler's words. When the handler finished, Lee nodded once. That was it. One nod. The champion removed his jacket. He rolled his shoulders. Then he turned to one of his men and said something in Japanese. The man stepped forward carrying a thick wooden board. Dense. Heavy. The kind of board that does not break easily. The champion held it with one hand. He set his stance. And with a single strike, he split that board clean in half. The crack filled the room. His hand was untouched. Not a scratch. Not a mark. He held up both pieces and let them drop to the floor. Believe me, that was not a warm-up. That was a message. That board was a preview of what he planned to do to Bruce Lee's ribs. Lee watched the whole thing. His expression did not change. He did not clap. He did not flinch. He did not look at the broken board on the floor. He kept his eyes on the champion's center mass. The chest. The hips. The place where all movement begins. They faced each other, maybe 6 feet apart. The champion took his stance. Traditional. Low. Grounded. His weight was set. His hands were positioned in the classical karate guard. He looked like a man carved from stone. Lee stood open. His arms hung at his sides. His feet were shoulder-width apart. No guard. No stance that anyone in that room recognized. He looked relaxed. He looked unprepared. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. And that is exactly what the champion saw. An opening, an invitation, a mistake. He attacked. Fast. A three-strike combination aimed at Li's head and body. Right hand. Left hand. Right hand again. The kind of combination that ends amateur fights before they start. Li was not there. Not for any of them. He moved before the strikes arrived. Not after. Before. His body shifted like water running around a stone. The champion's fists cut through empty air. The champion reset. His face changed. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion. He attacked again. Harder. Faster. A straight kick followed by a lunging punch. Li slipped the kick without stepping back. He let the punch pass his chin by less than an inch. His feet barely moved. His eyes never left the champion's center. Now get this. The champion had fought 52 men. Professionals. Trained fighters. Not one of them had made him miss twice in a row. Bruce Lee made him miss every single time. The room was silent. The men along the walls were not breathing. The champion loaded his right hand. This was it. The killing strike. The same punch that had ended 30 fights. He planted his back foot. He torqued his hips. He drove every ounce of force he had into that single devastating blow. It hit nothing. Li was already inside. Past the fist. Past the elbow. Past the guard. He moved so fast the camera in the back corner could barely register it. One moment the champion's fist was extending. The next moment Li was beside him. Below him. Through him. In a single motion, Li took the champion to the floor. Not with a strike. With control. He redirected the man's own momentum, swept his base, and put him flat on his back. Before the champion could process what had happened, Li's fist was 1 inch from his throat. 1 inch. Hovering. Still. The champion's eyes went wide. He was not hurt. He was gasping. Not from impact. From the sudden, total understanding that he had never been in this fight. Not for a single second. Li held that position. 1 inch. 3 full seconds. The room was absolutely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Li pulled his fist back. He stood. He stepped away. And he extended his hand to the champion. The champion lay there for a moment, his chest rising and falling. Then he reached up and took Li's hand. Li pulled him to his feet. The two men stood facing each other. Li gave a small nod. The champion returned it. A few of the men along the wall exhaled. Someone shifted his weight. The handler uncrossed his arms. It looked like respect had been exchanged. It looked like the matter was settled. It looked, for one quiet moment, like this was over. It was not over. The handler's eyes moved. Not toward the champion. Not toward Li. Toward the back corner of the room. Toward a small shape tucked behind a gym bag on a folding chair. A shape with a lens. A shape with a small red light that should not have been glowing. The 8mm camera. The handler's face changed. The politeness disappeared. The composure cracked. He pointed at the camera and said one word. Destroy it. And just like that, the nature of everything in that room shifted. The fight was over. But the war had just begun. Because this was no longer about who won. This was about the evidence that the fight had ever happened. The handler crossed the room in 4 steps. He stood over the camera and turned to face Li. His voice was no longer measured. It was sharp. Controlled, but sharp. He said the footage could not leave this room. He said that if any recording of this encounter reached the public, there would be consequences. Legal consequences. Professional consequences. He said the Federation had relationships. In Japan. In Hollywood. In places that mattered to a man trying to build a career in American entertainment. Now here's the thing. This was not an empty threat. The Japanese Karate Federation in 1967 was deeply connected to the international martial arts community. They had influence over tournament circuits, over magazine coverage, over the flow of students between continents. And they had relationships with people in the American film industry. Studio executives who consulted martial arts advisors. Insurance companies who decided whether a performer was safe to put on set. One phone call. That is all it would take. One phone call saying Bruce Lee was dangerous, unstable, a liability, and doors that were just beginning to open would slam shut. Lee understood this immediately. You could see it in his face. Not fear. Calculation. He was weighing options in real time. The handler demanded the film. He wanted the camera and everything in it. He wanted it handed over. Right now. In front of witnesses. Lee's student who had been operating the camera looked at Lee. His hands were shaking. He was young. Maybe 22. He had never been in a room like this. He had pressed record because he thought he was capturing history. Now he was standing in the middle of something much bigger than a fight. Lee hesitated. And believe me, Bruce Lee did not hesitate often. But in that moment, he made a calculation that cost him. He told his student to hand over the camera. The student's face fell. But he did what Lee said. He walked to the chair, picked up the camera, and carried it to the handler. The handler took it, turned it over, opened the back. It was empty. The film canister was gone. What no one in the room knew, what even Lee did not know in that moment, was that another student had seen the danger before anyone else. While the champion was still on the floor, while the room was still holding its breath, this student had quietly stepped behind the chair, opened the camera, removed the small metal canister holding the film, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He did it in less than 5 seconds. He did it while every eye in the room was locked on Lee's fist hovering over the champion's throat. The handler stared at the empty camera. His jaw tightened. He looked around the room. He looked at every face along the wall. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. He did not find the film, because the film was already in a jacket pocket, and that jacket was already moving toward the door. But the handler was not finished. He turned back to Lee and delivered his second threat. He said that if any account of this fight became public in any form, the Federation would act. They would contact every studio Lee had ever spoken with. They would tell them Lee was violent, that he had attacked a visiting champion, that he was unfit for professional work. The story would be rewritten, and in the rewritten version, Lee would not be the winner. He would be the aggressor. The champion himself spoke for the first time since the fight. He straightened his jacket. He did not acknowledge his defeat. He said the conditions were unfair. He said the floor was wrong. The space was too small. The rules were unclear. He demanded a rematch. Formal rules. Proper venue. Judges. Lee looked at him. Not with anger. Not with contempt. With something closer to patience. He said no. He said there would be no rematch. He said he had proven what needed to be proven. The champion's men moved toward the door. The handler gave Lee one last look. It was not a look of respect. It was a warning. Then they were gone. Lee's students were furious. They wanted to go public immediately. They wanted the world to see the footage. They wanted every martial arts magazine, every journalist, every skeptic to watch the champion throw his best punch and hit nothing but air. They wanted vindication. Lee stopped them. He said going public would turn a private truth into a public war. He said the karate establishment would not accept the footage. They would deny it, attack it, call it fabricated. And in the process, they would drag Lee into a fight he could not win with his fists. Political fight, a media fight, a fight where the truth did not matter as much as the story. He chose silence. But the film canister was already outside the gym. Already in the back seat of a car heading east through Chinatown. Already beyond anyone's control. That night, Lee sat alone in the gym. The lights were off except for a single bulb above the training floor. He knew the footage existed. He knew his student had saved it. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not control what happened next. The fight lasted 18 seconds. The consequences were about to last decades. The footage did not surface immediately. It moved slowly, quietly, the way dangerous things move when powerful people want them buried. Lee's student made a copy within the first week. Then another. Then a third. He did not sell them. He did not take them to a newspaper. He gave them to people he trusted. Other martial artists. Men who trained in small gyms across Los Angeles. Men who understood what the footage meant. And those men made copies of their own. Within a month, the footage had reached San Francisco. Within 3 months, it was in New York. By the end of the year, copies existed in dojos across the country, always passed by hand, always shared in private, always accompanied by the same whispered story. This is real. This actually happened. This is Bruce Lee in a real fight. The Karate Federation responded exactly as Lee predicted. They denied the fight had ever taken place. They released a statement through their affiliated publications saying the champion had visited Los Angeles for a cultural exchange. Nothing more. They called the footage fabricated. They said it was staged. They said it was an insult to the champion's legacy and to the integrity of professional karate. But here is the problem with denial. It only works when the evidence is weak. And the evidence was not weak. Someone pulled a single frame from the footage. One still image. It showed Lee's fist hovering 1 inch from the champion's throat. The champion's eyes were wide. His back was flat on the floor. His hands were open. He was not fighting. He was finished. That freeze frame became the thing that no amount of denial could answer. It appeared in underground martial arts newsletters. Photocopied. Grainy. Sometimes barely visible. But unmistakable. There was Lee. There was the champion. And there was the truth frozen in a single fraction of a second. Now get this. The Federation did not stop at denial. They escalated. They reached out through their connections, just as the handler had threatened. Word began to move through Hollywood. Quiet word. The kind that does not show up in newspapers but shows up in phone calls and closed-door meetings. Lee is difficult. Lee is aggressive. Lee is a risk. Some doors began to close. A project that had been moving forward stalled. A meeting that had been scheduled was postponed. Then postponed again. Then canceled. Lee felt the pressure. He knew where it was coming from. And he faced a choice that was harder than anything that had happened in that gym. He could fight back. He could take the footage public himself. He could hold a press conference, show the film, name the champion, and let the world see what the Federation was trying to hide. It would be explosive. It would make headlines. And it would turn Bruce Lee into the center of a war between martial arts traditions that could consume years of his life. Or he could do what he had always done. He could let his work speak. He chose his work. This is where it turns. Because the man who could have destroyed the karate establishment with 18 seconds of film chose instead to build something that would outlast all of them. He poured everything into his philosophy. He formalized what he had been developing for years. He wrote. He taught. He refined. He called it Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It was not a style. It was the rejection of all rigid styles. It was the idea that a fighter should be like water, formless, adaptable, free. And the world noticed. Not because of the footage. Not because of the fight. Because of the work itself. If this story is doing something for you, if you are still here and still listening, take a second to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That is all I ask. Now let me finish this. The champion returned to Japan. He never gave a public interview about what happened in that gym. Not once. Not in any language. But those who trained with him said he changed. Slowly, quietly, he began asking questions he had never asked before. He started studying movement outside of karate. He watched footage of boxers, of wrestlers, of fighters who broke the rules he had spent his life defending. He never said Lee's name, but the people closest to him knew. They knew exactly what had started it. The footage kept moving. Every attempt to suppress it failed. Every denial made people more curious. Every official statement from the Federation sent more martial artists searching for the film. The harder they tried to bury it, the deeper it spread. And here is the thing about truth when you try to bury it. It does not die. It just finds another way to the surface. Lee won that fight twice. Once in the gym with his fist 1 inch from a man's throat. And once outside the gym by refusing to let the suppression define him. By choosing creation over combat. By building something so undeniable that the footage became secondary to the philosophy it proved. The karate establishment wanted to erase 18 seconds. Bruce Lee built a legacy that would outlast them all. Years passed. The world changed. Bruce Lee changed with it. He made films that shattered box office records across Asia. He became the most recognizable martial artist on the planet. He moved with a speed and precision that audiences had never seen on screen. And every time a critic questioned whether his abilities were real, somewhere in the world, a grainy piece of film was being passed from one hand to another. Proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. The footage survived everything. It survived the Federation's denials. It survived the decades before the internet made sharing effortless. It survived because people protected it. Martial artists who understood what those 18 seconds meant did not let them disappear. They copied the film. They transferred it to VHS when that technology arrived. They mailed tapes across oceans. They carried them in bags to seminars and private training sessions. They showed them to students the way a teacher shows a student something sacred. Carefully, reverently, with the understanding that what they were watching was not just a fight. It was a turning point. Believe me, I have spoken to men who saw those tapes in the 1970s. Old men now. Men who were young fighters when the footage first reached their gyms. And every one of them says the same thing. They say they watched it once and their understanding of what was possible changed forever. Not because Lee was fast. They expected fast. But because he moved before the attack began. He did not react to the champion. He read him. He intercepted. He was already where the champion was going before the champion knew he was going there. That is not speed. That is something else entirely. The champion lived into old age. He returned to Japan after the Los Angeles trip and never spoke publicly about Bruce Lee. Not once in any interview. Not once in any published conversation. His silence was absolute. Some people took that silence as dignity. Others took it as shame. But those closest to him understood it differently. A student of the champion, speaking many years after the champion's death, confirmed every detail. He said the fight happened exactly as the footage showed. He said the champion never denied it in private. He said the champion came home from Los Angeles a different man. Quieter. More thoughtful. He began training differently. He began asking questions about movement, about adaptability, about the limits of any single system. He never credited Lee publicly, but the change was obvious to anyone paying attention. Now here's the thing about that. It might be the most important part of this entire story, because the champion's private transformation proves something that the footage alone cannot. The footage proves Lee was faster. The footage proves Lee was more skilled. But the champion's change proves something deeper. It proves that what happened in that gym was not just a defeat. It was an education. And the champion, to his credit, was honest enough to learn from it. Even if he could never say so out loud. The karate establishment eventually moved on. Not because they accepted what happened. Because the world moved past them. Mixed martial arts emerged in the 1990s. Fighters began doing exactly what Lee had preached decades earlier. They mixed styles. They crossed disciplines. They refused to be limited by tradition. And every single one of them, whether they knew it or not, was walking a path that Bruce Lee had cleared. Jeet Kune Do was never about Bruce Lee being the best fighter in the world. It was about the idea that no single system owns the truth. That a fighter should absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is uniquely his own. Lee wrote those words. He lived them. And in that small gym in Chinatown, in 18 seconds that the world was never supposed to see, he proved them. Some of the Federation officials who had been in that room eventually spoke. Not publicly, not on record, but in private conversations, in quiet admissions to trusted colleagues. A few of them acknowledged what had happened. One of them, an elderly man by then, said something that I think matters more than anything else in this story. He said, "We were not angry because he won. We were angry because he was right." That is the part that haunted them. Not the loss. The truth behind the loss. The truth that their system, their tradition, their lifetime of rigid discipline, had been made irrelevant in 18 seconds by a man who refused to follow anyone's rules but his own. The footage exists today. You can find it if you know where to look. It has been digitized, enhanced, analyzed frame by martial arts historians who measure reaction times and calculate the physics of movement. The numbers confirm what the witnesses always said. Li's interception speed was beyond anything the analysts had a model for. He was not just faster than the champion. He was operating on a different timeline. But here is what stays with me. It is not the speed. It is not the technique. It is the ending. Li's fist, 1 inch from the champion's throat, hovering. Still, he could have made contact. He could have struck. At that distance, with that speed, the champion could not have stopped it. But Li chose to stop himself. He chose restraint. He chose to deliver the message without delivering the damage. That is power. Not the ability to destroy, the ability to choose not to. Somewhere in a collector's home, there is a worn VHS tape. The label is handwritten, faded ink on a white sticker. The tape has been played so many times the image shakes. The tracking lines run across the screen. The color is nearly gone. The sound is nothing but hiss. But if you watch closely, if you lean in and let your eyes adjust to the grain and the static, you can still see it. The fist, 1 inch from the throat. The stillness, the silence. The moment a man proved everything without making contact. Some men carry their proof in trophies, in titles, in records etched into stone. Bruce Lee carried his in 18 seconds of grainy film that the world tried to erase. Some men carry their proof in silence. And the silence speaks louder than any punch ever could.